new Muslim, no, excuse me, pardon me. We're going to be talking about her book with Ustadh Ubaydullah, get into a little discussion on Muslims, race, and hip hop culture. I'm really, really excited for today's discussion. We want to give a few announcements before we get into the program and for today, inshallah. And so a couple announcements that we have for you is that we, alhamdulillah, have just launched our, ALIM has just launched our Launch Good campaign for the year. And so I want to share that link with you, inshallah, if you'd like to support our Launch Good campaign. And I will actually go over it just so you can get a look at what we are doing for our Launch Good campaign this year. We're really excited to share this with you all. We're actually calling this campaign Give License to Think. And so if you haven't joined our summer program, as a student who's been through the summer program, I think that is what ALIM really gives, is we give license to think to Muslim Americans, to think about how our religion, our culture, how to develop Islam in America, and how to develop ourselves as Muslims. So if you go to Launch Good and then you look up ALIM or you look up Give a License to Think, you can support our campaign. We just went live about a week ago. And so you can check that out, inshallah, if you go there. So I just wanted to share that with you. I also wanted to announce that we are with today's discussion. So today we're talking with Dr. Suad, and next week, inshallah, we have our book club. And so we're actually going to be discussing Dr. Suad's book. And so if you would like to sign up for that, go to ALIM's website and look up you can just look up ALIM and then book club, and you can sign up to get notified about that, inshallah. It's every week we have a discussion on a different book, and every month. And we go over different books, and so live discussion over Zoom. You get to talk with Ustadh Ubaydullah and some ALIM team members. So it's a really nice program, alhamdulillah. And we actually are going to be doing our Giving Tuesday campaign on the 30th of November. So it's a live event. So you'll definitely want to tune into that, inshallah. It's with Ustadh Ubaydullah Evans, and you're going to be hearing from different students, supporters of ALIM, to hear about their experiences, to learn more about our program, our upcoming summer program, which is already live. So if you'd like to sign up for that, you can start getting registered. So those are a couple announcements that we do have. If you are curious about, if you're new to ALIM and you're like, who are we? What am I going to be supporting? A couple quick facts that I want to give you all. So actually, this year was the 22nd annual summer program. So I went in 2016, so that was like 99. Was our 22nd annual summer program. So ALIM has been going strong for alhamdulillah many years. We've had some really brilliant thinkers come out of the ALIM program. We funded over $36,000 in scholarships to our program. We've had students from international. We have international students. We've had students from I think 16 states attend our programs. And so if you're just curious about it, go to ALIM's website, and you can learn more about our programs. And of course, you'll be hearing more about us on Giving Tuesday, inshallah, if you do tune into that. So we're looking forward to that. I wanted to actually go ahead and introduce Dr. Suad for today. Dr. Suad, who's our guest for today. And so we can learn more about her. If you haven't heard of her, which I'd be surprised if you haven't, she has been a teacher at ALIM. She taught in my year. I remember that was actually one of my favorite classes. So I'm really excited to hear today's conversation. So Dr. Suad Abdul Khabeer is a scholar, artist, and activist. In her most recent work, she examines the intersections of official history and the untold stories of Black women and Black Muslims through the lens of her mother's life. Ummi means mother in Arabic, so she named this series of digital exhibitions Ummi's Archive. If you have Instagram or social media, you can go to Ummi's Archive, and it's a really, really beautiful project, alhamdulillah. I've been keeping up with it. The project sees everyday Black women as people who know things we all need to know. And she's trained as an anthropologist in her first book, Muslim Cool, Race, Religion, and Hip Hop, which we're going to be discussing today because it's almost, I think it's either the 5th year anniversary or almost. Dr. Suad can let us know. Is a critically acclaimed ethnography on Islam and hip hop that examines how intersecting ideas of Muslimness and Blackness challenge and reproduce the meanings of race in the U.S. Her written work on Islam and hip hop is accompanied by her performance ethnography, Sampled Beats of Muslim Life, which is a one-woman solo performance designed to present and represent her research and findings to diverse audiences as part of her commitment to public scholarship. And in line with this commitment, Dr. Suad leads Sapolo Square, the first website dedicated to the comprehensive documentation and analysis of the Black U.S. American Muslim experience. She has also written for The Root, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, Ebony Magazine, Huffington Post, Religious Dispatches, and Transmissions, and she has appeared on Al Jazeera English. Additionally, Dr. Suad is a senior project advisor for the U.S. Public Television award-winning documentary New Muslim Cool, and her poetry was featured in anthology Living Islam Out Loud, American Muslim Women Speak. And in 2018, she was profiled as one of the most 25 influential American Muslims by CNN, and she received the Soros Equality Fellowship in 2019. She is currently an associate professor of American culture and Arab and Muslim American studies at the University of Michigan. She received her PhD in cultural anthropology from Princeton University and is a graduate from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University and completed the Islamic Studies Diploma program of the Institute at Abu Nur University. She's actually she was one of my teacher's classmates, I believe. Ustadh Zainab Ansari. She was a classmate with you, Dr. Suad, on archive.com. Okay, perfect. We will share the links to all of her content, inshallah, in the chat when we get started. Dr. Suad, if you're ready to come up, we'd love to have you come on, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. How are you?
Hold on, I have to turn on my audio. Okay, assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. We're really excited. So I'm going to share all the links to your books, your websites, Omi's archive in the chat, inshallah. And Ustadh Ubaydullah is joining us now. But if you'd like to give us kind of an update on how you've been, what you've been doing. I'm at Taysir Seminary now, actually. And I was talking with Ustadh Zainab. We went over the intro to your book in our Islam in America class. So it started a lot of discussion. People really liked it, alhamdulillah. And she told me that she's like, yeah, I studied with her. We met overseas and everything. So, yeah, she was really excited about this program. Alhamdulillah.
So what is it that you'd like me to start with?
Well, while Ustadh Ubaydullah is joining us, to just give a quick, introduction about your book, for people who might not know about it, for our audience who don't know about you or about your work, if you'd like to give a quick intro while Ustadh Ubaydullah joins us, inshallah.
Oh, sure. So, as you mentioned, when you started, I'm the author of Muslim Cool. This is my book, and this is actually probably the first copy of it that I had, that I got about 5 years ago, this month. So as you were saying, I was like, yeah, Muslim Cool is sort of celebrating an anniversary. It's 5 years old. Muslim Cool, I'm an anthropologist. I was trained as an anthropologist. So Muslim Cool is an ethnography, which means it is a study of everyday life. I was really interested particularly in the relationship between Blackness or Muslim identity and Blackness. And so the way that I looked at that was through hip hop, because hip hop, music and culture, has its roots in the African diaspora, and central to hip hop music and culture, what we call the fifth element is knowledge of self, which comes from sort of Muslim communities and Black Muslim communities in particular, their influence, their relationship to broader Black communities and their influence on broader Black communities. So I was really interested in that. And so that's where kind of Muslim Cool started. I did my field work, my research in Chicago, Illinois, primarily. Also, although I did some trips to the California Bay Area, and particularly the UK, which shows up in the final chapter of the book. So really it's a study, it's an examination, an exploration of that relationship between Blackness and Muslim identity. I think one of the primary things that Muslim Cool is arguing, and is kind of where it begins, is that Blackness, and when I say Blackness, I'm talking about sort of the intellectual and cultural and social, right, kind of production of people of African descent, of Black people, as well as ideas that circulate about us as well as the ways, the kinds of things we put in the world can be taken up by others, right? So Blackness, this kind of really multidimensional reality, is central to what it means to be Muslim in the United States. And so even if you're not Black, right? So the idea is that, you know, it shapes how you do Islam in this country. So that's one of the sort of fundamental and primary arguments that the book makes. Outside of that, and Blackness is also diasporic, and so I focus on the United States because I'm working in Chicago, and so that kind of very specific history of the United States is important to the work, but Blackness exceeds, right, the United States. Yeah, so that's kind of what Muslim Cool is about. And so I do this kind of everyday conversations with people. I focus primarily on younger people in my research. Oh, there with my light. Younger people in the research. So people who are like, you know, sort of college age, and then other folks that range in age in the Chicagoland area, sort of where I focus the work. And some of your favorite people show up or institutions as well as a part of the analysis.
No, thank you. I know I just got word that Ustadh Ubaydullah is joining like now. So until he does join, I guess could you tell us, you know, what really inspired you? We just put the link in the chat for people who are interested in learning more or purchasing the book. You can look in the chat, inshallah, for that. But kind of what inspired you to
Not
get
an Amazon link, right?
Yes, the Amazon link.
No Amazon link.
Oh, not the one.
Amazon. We don't support Amazon.
Is there a better link? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, they can go to NYU Press.
Okay.
They can go to Indie, like I think, what is it called? Bookshop. They can go to Uncle Bobby's bookstore in Philly.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to buy from Amazon. And actually, if you go to drsuad.com, I have links there. And I believe I
found the NYU Press one, so we'll put that in the chat, inshallah, so people can purchase it there. But I guess while we wait for him to join, he might ask you this, but hopefully I'll let him know that I asked. So what kind of inspired you to get into this like specific line of research? Was it like your upbringing, or, you know, what inspired you specifically to like write this book?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think the story of Muslim Cool, actually, you mentioned Zainab Ansari and me meeting her actually. Well, actually, before I was in Damascus, I was in Egypt studying as a study abroad student, and we went to Damascus, and that's where I first met her. But the story of Muslim Cool kind of starts actually with kind of my travel abroad. I think right before I left, there was this, it was called the Islamic Family Conference and Concert. I think it was held in Tampa. And I remember that's when it first kind of piqued my interest. And this was probably 2001. This is like probably the summer of 2001. It kind of piqued my interest. And there was a hip hop concert that was there. And so, Christy Z Pabon, or Christy Z rather, was one of the people who organized it, as well as, I believe, Podmaster Fable, who was a Muslim brother from the Bronx, Puerto Rican. He's a member of the legendary Rocksteady crew. He's a popper. I think he was also there. A bunch of different other kind of like Muslim artists who did hip hop music. So I remember being kind of intrigued a little bit then, but then sort of fast forward in October of 2001, I was on my way to Damascus. And then in February of 2002, American embassies have these American cultural centers. And the cultural centers like have events. And so they were having a Black History Month programming. And what they were having was they had like films. It was like He Got Game, Boys in the Hood, Love and Basketball, something crazy like that. And I was kind of like, that's crazy. Y'all need to invite brother Dr. Suleiman Yang to come give a talk on Islam in America. And they were like, well, why don't you give a talk? Which absolutely made no sense. But I was like, okay, sure. And the first thing that came to my mind was this relationship between Islam and hip hop, because I wanted to talk. It was Black History Month. I wanted to talk about Islam in the United States. And hip hop gave me the entry to talk about everything from the transatlantic slave trade, right, to the building of Black Muslim communities in the United States. Like that came that way. So really, it kind of started there.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Salam alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
How are you, Dr. Suad?
I am hanging in there. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. I'm well, man. Please forgive my tardiness. I had to pick Asia. Oh, wait. We're supposed to be on official terms here.
Yes.
We're not, but some different, no, but in all seriousness, it's really good to have you on. Dr. Suad, teacher, artist, author, performer, archivist. This month, we're reading Muslim Cool. And it sounds like you were actually giving some of the background of the book when I entered the conversation, but just so I can pick up on where you guys left off. Where did the idea, where did the genesis to produce this book come from?
Well, yeah, I was doing that. So she was asking me kind of what inspired me to do that.
Okay.
And so I was saying that kind of one of the first times, if I think about when I first started thinking about the relationship between Islam and hip hop, it kind of started in 2001. Was when I first started thinking about that relationship. When I came back from Damascus, I wasn't doing that kind of work. I was working at juvenile justice program in New York City. I was interested in working with young people, but I really wasn't sure what was going on, what I wanted to do just yet. I worked at that program for 2 years, and towards the end of that time, I began to consider what I wanted to do next. And I was debating between an MFA and a PhD. And a good friend of mine was like, Zora Neale Hurston was an anthropologist, and I didn't know that. And so I was like, oh, okay. So then I read this biography of Zora Neale Hurston. I think it's called Stepping Over Rainbows. And she felt like a spiritual ancestor to me. So I was like, okay, I want to be an anthropologist. And I also had come back. So I left in October of 2001. So I left after September 11th. I'm in New York. I was in New York on September 11th. And we were actually supposed to leave for September 14th.
New Yorkers are so proud. We know you're a New Yorker.
Actually, I'm from Brooklyn, to be very specific.
To be quite
right.
Okay.
Right. And so, my trip got delayed. And so I say that to say that part of what also drove me to graduate school was that when I returned to the United States, there was this kind of amplification, or much more discourse around Muslims in the United States than had ever been, before, but not people like me. Right. And so then I was sort of like, well, I want to intervene on that. Right. I was kind of interested in that. So I ended up in grad school, not necessarily going to do hip hop initially. I mean, I think I was considering doing something on reggaeton, but interested in music and culture and ways things move, but that kind of thing. But I ended up sort of settling on hip hop first through some of my work initially in Morocco, because I went to Morocco and they were hip hop artists there. And then I met Rami Nashashibi, who runs Iman. And he was like, oh, you should come see what we're doing in Chicago.
Okay.
And so then I came to see, and I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Because as a New Yorker, I should say, Chicago as a place is extremely rich, right? In terms of its history, in terms of the kind of people that have come through and have made homes there. And so it was also new to me, right? So it was it was a place where I knew I could learn something.
Yes.
So I ended up kind of staying there.
That's what's up. Now you have to pardon me. I'm going to beg your pardon from the very beginning. I'm from the Islam, I was trained in the Islamic tradition, and we have a tendency to overinterpret everything. But reading your book, and we're actually going to discuss the book next week, what I really love is I see all of these, I don't know if they're intentional or it's just me reading into them, but I see all of these pieces that are kind of like homages and odes to hip hop. So like the cover art is almost like a sample. Of course, that's it appears almost like a famous Vermeer, but what the subject of that artwork is different. Right? Was that intentional or
Yeah. Yes. No. I mean, I always tell people the cover was the best decision I made about my book because I know people who bought the book just on the cover.
Sure.
And so Awol Arizku is an Ethiopian American artist from LA, and this is his piece, and it's called "Girl with the Bamboo Earring." Right?
Okay, it's got a girl with a blue scarf.
Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring, and so, and it's, you know, she could be Muslim, she might not be. You know, I mean, there's a lot of a lot of ways, and actually, a really good artist friend of mine, Leslie Hewitt, really encouraged me to use it because she said there's a lot of ways you could enter from that.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I saw right early on is this idea of a loop. Of course, a loop being something that a producer would use when sampling other forms of music to make hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talk about this loop, kind of Islam feeding hip hop, but then, you know, hip hop feeding Islam. And there's kind of
Muslims,
Muslims, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, but in a sense, feeding Islam.
So definitely, I mean, the loop is important. It is in the book. I talk about it both in terms of, right, this idea of the loop, right, how we get the loop, right, in terms of you kind of take a sample of music and you loop it to create new music. It also, the loop is also the cipher, right? And the cipher is the space in which hip hop culture is sort of reborn and regenerates. And so, that metaphor was really important because there's a kind of rebirth and regeneration that's also happening in the loop of Muslim cool, right? And so the idea is that, you know, Black Muslim thought and culture shaped the people who made hip hop, right? And so people will talk about, you know, the ways in which, particularly the Nation of Islam, and messages of, you know, kind of cultural empowerment, love of self, right? How they really shaped how not just the music they created, which we see, because we see, you know, there's samples of, like, you know, Malcolm X really early on, and, you know, there's always some sample. Just recently in Busta Rhymes' Extinction Factor, there's a sample of Minister Farrakhan, right? So that kind of thing is also happening, but in the kind of what we say in terms of hip hop, excuse me, the fifth.
I mean, you know, I remember on Beats, Rhymes, and Life, Tribe Called Quest, they sample Imam Siraj.
Right, Imam Siraj shows up on that. You know, so there's lots of that, right? Lots of that kind of sampling, and so you know, so that also is there, but in the music, but it's in the consciousness, right? It's in the way. And so when we talk about hip hop, we talk about elements, right? And there's these artistic elements. There's DJing, emceeing, dance, graffiti art. Sometimes people may say beatboxing is its own element or not. But the fifth element is knowledge, right? Knowledge of self. So that comes into hip hop, music, and culture. And we see it all the time in all forms. And then in my research, what I found was that this generation, well, generations, I should say, but I focus on one particular part of generation of young Muslims who were sort of navigating what it meant to be Muslim and finding in hip hop music and culture a blueprint and a script to how to do that, right? Because Islam has shaped hip hop. So for them, then, if they're thinking about their identity as Muslims, well, there are all these things they can connect to, right, in the music. And it's bringing them to Islam, but particularly bringing them to Black Islam, right? Bringing them to an awareness, an appreciation, and engagement with the ways in which Black people in the United States in particular have shaped sort of Muslim reality.
But see, one of the issues that this book raised for me was when I'm thinking about Black Islam and I'm thinking about hip hop, these are both traditions that unapologetically appropriated. They borrowed from other sources, whether it was Bambaataa sampling German electronic music with, you know, groups like Kraftwerk, or the early Nation of Islam and Moorish Science Temple of America, using aspects of Islamic theology, Islamic eschatology, etc., for the very express goal of empowering Black people, for the very express goal of dismantling white supremacy. But in the opening chapter of your book, I remember the character. Now the weird thing about this book is I think I know all of the people in the book. that's what, like, reading this book for me, I'm like, subhanAllah, you know, I should just focus on the scholarship and not the fact that, wait, I think I know who she's talking about, right? But, you know, one character is really dealing with the appropriation of her wearing fatigue, right? She wears fatigue. This is an expression of hers. It's something she identifies with, the struggle, right? And you see a lot of that, you know, within hip hop fashion. There's a lot of, remixing of, you know, garments. I mean, that's been Black fashion, you know, generally. But this is also a kind of an appropriation. But she almost feels that it's an unwarranted or a kind of stealing of her style, her legacy, her particular aesthetic. And so I'm always confused as to how a tradition that unapologetically appropriates, like we taking this and making music out of it.
Right. So I think you're conflating a number of things. So you have to separate them. So in terms of the story, Esperanza is from Chicago. She's Dominican. She grew up like in hip hop music and culture, and she's like, there are all these like South Asian, she said this, like, she calls her a Pakistani girl, I think, or something like that, who is super cute, you know, and everything. And she likes camouflage, but she's like, yo, you live in a mansion, and I grew up, you know, here, right?
Sure,
the opposite of that.
Sure.
So the thing about appropriation is, you know, so the idea between, like, when I teach classes, talk about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation versus cultural exchange.
Okay.
And the thing about appropriation is that we talk about appropriation when there's a power dynamic, right? When the person who has the cultural product is in a sort of marginal position vis-a-vis power to the person who is sort of taking the cultural product, right?
Correct.
So when a hip hop artist samples German craft work, they're not in a this is not an equal power relationship, right? So that's the first thing there. The second thing is, you know, we are the original man. Who's appropriating Islamic eschatology? This is our original, right? No, yeah. So I think it's inappropriate to say that the Nation of Islam and, you know, are appropriating, right? Because within the cosmology of those groups, right, this is their inheritance, right? And with the cosmology of Black Muslims, broadly speaking, right, Africa and the things that it produces in particular and its relationship to Islam that is our heritage. So see themselves as appropriate. So I'm saying that because I think that's important. It's important to sort of be specific about what we're talking about, right? And that said, right, I think that, and hip hop is, so there's a lack of a power imbalance in which the sort of the young Black and non-Black Latine people who create hip hop music are vulnerable, marginalized, and not powerful, right? So if they're taking something from the German craft, this is a form of cultural appreciation, it's a form of cultural exchange, but it's not appropriation in the way like if Kylie Jenner wears cornrows. Like those are not the same things, right?
Okay.
Then there is the idea that the people you're talking about in terms of the Islam part see themselves as returning to what it is that was originally theirs. Then there is the fact that as diasporic Africans, right, as people who are descendants of enslaved Africans, remixing what we like to call it, like whether it's from being a trickster, right, and all the ways in which, you know, you kind of take on sort of, you know, kind of like white people stuff and
Monica
make it your
Miller's
own,
book is excellent.
right? Real, like this is also the ways in which our cultural forms operate, precisely because of the ways there. I mean, the ideas of trickster and all that those things also have their roots in African traditions that people brought with them, right? But within the context, right, of being dominated by white power, this is also a practice that happens. So I say that to say that I don't think this is a question of appropriation in that sense. Like I don't think it's like, oh, how, you know, like what Esperanza is describing and what, you know, Cool Herc or somebody did, like these are not one-to-ones.
No, they're not one-to-ones, but in the sense that I'm taking something that is not a part of my direct cultural legacy and I'm applying it in a way that I choose. I'm applying it in a way that might not be true to how that thing was developed or how that thing was conventionally applied. So I think it would be unwise to act as if those power differentials are not relevant, because those power differentials are clearly relevant. But at base, if somebody admires something and they want to make use of it, or they want to practice it as an expression of their appreciation for it, I almost feel like that is the very essence of hip hop. Now, hip hop does come from people that were marginalized, people that were disenfranchised, under-resourced, forgotten, and that happens to be a part of the cultural genesis of hip hop. But the ability to take something and apply it to one's very unique kind of aesthetic viewpoint, I feel like that's very hip hop.
It's also very human, but you can't bracket out the power.
Mm-hmm.
So the point that people see things, they appreciate it, they might want to incorporate it, as a human process in many different ways. So we can't bracket out the power. So the question is about, like, what is the impact of that? What happens when we do that? What new forms of relationships or relation sort of comes into being? What new forms of culture come into being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me is what's the important thing here. And so this is the reason why. And even Esperanza says in her, the quote that I quote her, she's like, you can't tell people what to wear.
Right. And then she said Rabia was different.
Right. She says Rabia was different because she has this relationship. No, I said Rabia was different. No. It was different people. So Esperanza was like, you can't tell people what to wear. But if you're going to take something, right,
mm-hmm.
that's mine, at least you have to show knowledge, right, and respect. And so this is where it comes from, right? Mm-hmm. Which is very much hip hop. Like hip hop is about lineage.
Yeah, you can't be a biter. You can't. Right. That was the cardinal sin.
Hip hop is about
being inventive and not being original.
Right. But hip hop is also about citation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the sampling and citation. So hip hop, like, people are like, and there's a whole like art around finding where the samples are. Yeah, so there are principles around, like when I first got into sort of hip hop dance kind of formally, I would say, it's like a Sufi tariqa. You have to have a teacher. And you have to have a lineage. You have to have isnad. If you don't have isnad, nobody's checking for you. Like, who taught you that?
Yeah, who taught you that? Yeah, no.
So that's similar in sort of all forms of hip hop sort of music, right? So there is this kind of, and so I think what Esperanza is asking for is part of hip hop's culture, right? Like real heads. What are they talking about? Where does this come from? There's this whole practice of learning.
I see it.
Really get involved in the music, as opposed to, I'm gonna just pick up this thing. Mm-hmm. Don't nobody know where it came from, or why, or how, or when, or where. And
so I mean, like, moving that, I think, to another equally relevant question. When we see a lot of non-Black Muslims now who, at least ostensibly, appear quite proud of the legacy of Black American Islam,
mm-hmm.
and they have adopted heroes like Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz and Sister Clara Muhammad and Abby Lincoln, and we see them talking about that legacy. I'm now, look, we're having a real conversation. We're having a real conversation. When I see that, I'm confused as to, do they truly see value in that history, and are they appreciating that history, and do they want to make it a part of their legacy as American Muslims, or is this the kind of appropriation that, as you were mentioning, you can't bracket out the power dynamic, so that when you go on television and you're talking about Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, but your relationship to actual contemporaneous Black communities is quite tenuous, I'm confused as to what to make. Is that sampling? Is that appropriation?
Well, I mean that's the point. So when I in that vignette when I talk about it, the point was that's also Rabia I was saying was different. So Rabia was one of the young Muslims that I spent time with when I was doing my work, and Rabia worked at Iman, right? And so Rabia had a real life relationship to Black people, and not just like. And even at Iman, like in another piece, not in the book, but another piece I talk about, you have people who come to Iman who is like, it's just a charity thing. So they come in for a day, they do a thing, and they're out. Rabia was a part of like youth programming there. She was very much involved in the work of the institution. And the work of the institution is very much geared toward sort of improving the realities that Black people's face in the Southwest side of Chicago, right? So it doesn't mean, and so you don't bracket out the power. So it's not that the power dynamic no longer exists, but is that it's mediated by the fact that there's an investment of time and a sacrifice of time and resources on the behalf on Rabia's part with actual living, breathing Black people, right? As opposed to, because it can go other way, as opposed to other people who, I would say, it's like our ancestors are still working, right? People like for free, right? So it's like, you don't know no Black people. What you talking about? These enslaved African Muslims? I'm indigenous. No, you're not, right? You know what I mean? So yes, and part of what I try to do in Muslim Cool is identify that tension. I don't resolve it because we can't resolve it.
Can't resolve it. It can't resolve it.
Right? Like I say, we live with the ghosts of minstrelsy's past. Like we cannot resolve that. It's not going to be resolved. But we can identify it, and we can try to mediate right through the kinds of relationships we have with each other, right? The impact of that, because that history is not going away, right? But we can do something that improves upon, right, what we have by being honest about what's going on, and then trying to find ways in our relationships to each other, right, to sort of not repeat the mistakes of the past.
Man, I appreciate your integrity, because it's a to me it strikes me as something almost insoluble, in the sense that I'm not saying that a person has to do a certain amount of work in the community to, enjoy Wu-Tang with integrity, or, wear camouflage with integrity. But I do appreciate the tension that you're highlighting. Speaking of which, what do you think? Sometimes there's a tendency when we talk about Islam and hip hop, some people freeze that kind of historical phenomenon in the 1980s or the early 1990s. And I'm like, no, there's still a lot of linkages. There's a lot, even contemporarily, there is still much reference made to Islam and the Islamic tradition by working hip hop artists, working, in different fields of endeavor.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, we talk about the golden age, right? So sort of the mid 80s to the mid 90s or
golden age. You a hip hop Salafi? Golden hip hop still being produced, man.
Let me complete my thought. So we have this idea about the golden age, right, of hip hop, and in terms of the kinds of, and it's called the golden age because of just the sheer range of what was available and like readily available, right, on your radios, and then the sheer talent that's emerging as well, right. And so everybody, anybody else, someone's top 5 is usually someone who came of age, right, as a hip hop artist in this period. And in this period also coincided with, right, sort of, we're talking about people are, sort of protesting apartheid in South Africa. There's this kind of Black consciousness, Afrocentricity that's also reemerging, right, in Black communities across the nation, right? And Islam is always a part of that, right? So people talk about that because the references and everything were super explicit. It was super there, they just range from like, Big Daddy Kane, Assalamu Alaikum, to like Lauryn Hill, and don't forget about the D. Just really kind of explicit ranges. And so people, and there was even some articles, someone was making some point where they did some kind of like data set where they searched for like instances of like Allah or something like that, like in hip hop music, to make this claim that there was a decline. And after that period, to which I think that if you're looking for a law in a particular way, you could make that argument.
Sure.
But part of my argument is that the impact of Islam and Black Islam on hip hop is through knowledge of self. And so it's not always going to be someone saying a law in a song.
Yeah, right.
Not to mention all the 5% of stuff the person missed.
Right. We're completely over their head, right? You know
that's the thing, right? And so you'll have things like, I do this yearly. I started since, I guess, 2017 doing this Islam and hip hop year in review thing, on Twitter, like a Twitter
right.
top 10 moments. And so, and so I've included stuff like when I guess let's let that light go.
Sorry. It didn't change nothing. It ain't hurt nothing.
Right. When ASAP Ferg's song, right, where he says "ride with the mob," right, and he says, right, and the thing is, and people are like, it's not a religious song, by any stretch of the imagination, but he uses alhamdulillah properly. Like it's an accurate use of the term. Like it's not like he just threw it in there because he's trying to say something. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which to me, which indicates both sort of the continued relevance. And I believe actually he might have a grandparent that's Muslim as well. But also the ways in which Black Islam is part of like vernacular culture, everyday culture for Black people. So people gotta know this kind of stuff, so that you see things like that to, like I said recently, like in his whole extension level stuff that Busta Rhymes is doing, they're all this is replete with this kind of God, sort of God. I think he said like the return to God, or something like that, I think came up, or something like that in terms of the music. And so you'll see sort of that, when Kendrick Lamar, his first album, not the first album, but To Pimp a Butterfly came out, and I forget which song it was, but he did this kind of montage, which was a reflection of Gordon Parks' photos of the Nation of Islam from the 60s, right? And so he kind of reproduced that in his video. So, you know what I mean? And then even like I was talking about, Lil Mo she was a character on a season of Love and Hip Hop recently, and she was making Salah and the thing, and her like husband was like, "Oh, you finished?" or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it was just kind of like everything.
Yeah, but no more. Before that husband, she was married to a brother that was Muslim. He was a fightle named Carl Dargan. It's there. It's there
in lots of different ways. It depends on and ultimately for me, in my argument, because the impact and the relationship or the influences about knowledge of self. I think there's a broad range of sort of existential questions that when they come up in hip hop music, that is a reflection of knowledge of self. That's a reflection of the fifth element. That's a reflection of Black Islam.
One of the books that I find to really have almost this organic connection to your book is Richard Brent Turner's book, Soundtrack to a Movement, talking about Islam and jazz.
Right, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I've read that book, and I'm reading it alongside Muslim Cool, and I'm like, it's amazing to see those influences in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and then I see now this continuation. They're carrying over into the late 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and in each iteration, the operative term seems to be cool. It's almost it's cool because it's relevant to us and it's transatlantic at the same time. It's relevant to us and it opens us to worlds beyond, America and its history.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about cool too, like just kind of the almost like etymology of cool. In the fourth chapter, I'll talk about the dandies and this idea of so people talk
that
about
character Kareem just sounds. He's I don't know about that guy. Go
ahead. But they talk about maybe the concept having roots even in West Africa is one sort of story of cool, but there's this kind of, I think cool is about both a rejection of a particular kind of norm and the establishment of your own, and that is very Black. Right, because that is how we survive and we thrive in the conditions under which we have to live. Right, you have to reject the norm because it doesn't. And then you have to have your own standards. Right.
The essential feature of Black religion is belief in that cosmic no. No, this ain't it. No.
So I think, yes, I think people share that, and I remember I actually found one time, it's interesting. I remember once when I was doing research for Muslim Cool, I found this 1953, and actually we published it, like the prints of it on Sapolo Square. I found this 1953 article from Ebony magazine about, I'm forgetting his name, the jazz musician, but he was in Philly and he had become Muslim. And there was a whole spread about him becoming Muslim.
Yeah. I know exactly the artist that you're talking about, but I can't recall his name.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name right now. And so, and it was, and they talked, showed him his family, and then the Muslim community in Philadelphia and I don't know if it was the Adinyahu. I forget which community it was too, but he was in
the Deen community.
Yeah, right.
The community.
Right.
Yeah.
So so this whole thing was there. I remember seeing that and I just found that kind of randomly. I was kind of just doing some research and I found this sort of article from 1953, which is really powerful also just to think about, because we will talk about, obviously, jazz has a huge influence on hip hop, right? Mm-hmm. And the blues have a huge influence on jazz. And, Sylviane Diouf, the professor, she talks about, right, the sort of ways in which the blue, like how the impact of the adhan, right, the West African adhan in particular, right, on the harmonies and the sounds of the blues, right? So there's this kind of like way in which, that relationship, kind of predates, August, like Cool Herc's party, right? It can predate that.
Sure, that's what's up. So talk to us a little bit, because you referenced, the Sapolo Square. Tell us a little bit about Sapolo Square.
Yeah, so Sapolo Square is sort of a media and educational collaborative that I'm part of. We started officially in 2015. We're really interested in Black Muslims, the things that Black Muslims care about, right? And about providing a space, a forum where those kind of things can be centered and can be examined. Our experiences can be celebrated, but also interrogated, and so we do that. We've been doing that for, I guess this is year 6 now. We're in the 6th year of that now. And we, our content goes, we talk about arts and culture. So we talk about, movies and films and dance and fashion. And then what we
tafsir, and tafsir and all.
I said that's the arts and culture. And then we have, sort of politics, and we'll talk about like prison abolition and that kind of stuff. And we have history. And we, like I said, that piece on the brother who became Muslim in 53. And then, of course, we have the religion section. And one of the things that people love, I think one of the things we do that people love the most, at least we hear from, is our annual Ramadan series, right? Where Black Muslims reflect on the Quran, where we have a different sort of Black Muslim who might be might be a religious scholar, might be a different kind of scholar, might be an artist. And you kind of do the reflection of the gist of the day, right? We've been doing that for about 5 years now. We actually also just had started doing this podcast. So this year we had a podcast series, it's 10 episodes through in collaboration with the Maidan, which is a publication coming out of George Mason University. Our first episode was on being Black and Muslim on Turtle Island, and we had a conversation with an Afro-Native Muslim woman and a Latina Muslim woman about this question, like what is our relationship and what are our responsibilities to the original inhabitants, right? Of the Americas, right? As people, some of us who came here involuntarily, and some of us who did not. And actually, the next podcast episode, which should be releasing sometime this month, is called "Being Black and Muslim in the World," and it's a conversation that we had with a Black Muslim from Canada, from South Africa, and the UK, kind of talking about like what is similar, what is different. And so, those are kind of things. And we try to do, we have a freedom school that we started doing. This is the second summer we did the freedom school, right? And so we really try to create content and opportunities that encourage, right, catalytic thinking, right? Encourage the kind of thinking that will get people to sort of change something in their lives and the world around them.
MashaAllah. Now I think, and I say this without reservation. I think this is some of the most important work being done in our community, because we're arriving at what some people call kind of this first effective settlement, where the demographic makeup of the Muslim community now probably looks the way it's going to look for the foreseeable future. And I feel like Black American Muslim voices are starting to get lost. Sometimes we get lost trying to feel our way through orthodoxy, right? Because it's, these, vaunted and valued traditions from the Muslim world that we're trying to put into our voice, that we're trying to make speak to our experience, sometimes with more effectiveness, sometimes with less. You know what I'm saying? But that's a process that I think will take, in order to really get that down, judging by how that process occurred in other historical Muslim communities and or other epochs, it takes time to really get that to a place that it's seamless. But the fact that we have historians, anthropologists, artists talking about the Black American or Black Muslim experience with specificity and doing so unapologetically, I think this is work that we will come to see. We see its value now, but I think we will come to see its value, its true value, or perhaps we'll see value that we don't see now in 30 or 40 years.
I mean, I think that there are two things I like to say to respond to that. So one is, I'm not a historian. That's not my training. Like, this book is in the 21st century, right? Like that's where I started. But my most recent work has been looking back. And so I have a project that they talked about when we opened Umi's Archive. And, I began Umi's Archive. My mother, her name was Amina Matzelhak, and she was born Audrey Weeks in 1950 in Harlem, New York. And she died as Amina in October 2017. And it was a sudden death. She wasn't sick, anything like that. And I'm her oldest child. And so I had the responsibility of, kind of like doing that death cleaning. And, I always knew my mother had lived a sort of remarkable life, but going through her things really amplified what that meant.
Allahu Akbar. And
it amplified what we already have. I think sometimes, and even it's funny, for the last podcast episode, I wanted to we're not going to do this anymore, but I wanted to call it the end of the Black Muslim. That's what I wanted to call it. Because, I think that, when I started Sapolo Square, when we started Sapolo Square, this idea of Black Muslim, was not as popular as it is now. Right. Like a lot of people are talking, it wasn't. Right. And I even had a family friend. She was like, when you first was talking about that, I was like, what's she talking about? Whatever. And now she's like, oh, yeah. But I'm wary a little bit of it because it's not connected always to history. And there's an impulse to be represented. Right. Blackness is representational, when Blackness is actually foundational. And so it's like, and so Umi's Archive, it's like, people, how do, for one of the things I found, for example, in the archive was this folder from a Islamic weekend school that my mother and her friends had put on 1975 or 6 or something like that.
Such rich history.
The folder, literally, it has parent slips, and it has the curriculum and it's thorough and deep. She was an educator, all of them, they were all educators. But the point is that, people scratching their heads, like, oh, how are we going to do X, Y, or Z? As if we got to create the wheel all over again.
Right. This has already been done. Right.
And there's a lot of that. And so many people's, particularly for my generation, right? People whose parents became Muslim, or their grandparents, right? There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that knowledge, but you have to sort of look at it and talk about it and then share it. And so part of what Umi's Archive was about was doing exactly that, right? Finding these things and identifying the significance of it, not just to myself and my mother and her life, but to these broader questions around, our spirituality, around questions of power and politics and education. So So that's one thing. So one thing I feel like if Black Muslim voices are getting lost, part of that is the product of, I think, not enough taking stock of who you already are.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly.
And I think, and then the other thing, and I guess I think it's all I want to say about that. I guess actually.
Yeah, I think there is some kind of amnesia that has occurred when we talk about kind of this Black Muslim project as though it's something we're creating ex nihilo. Like this is something, whereas I think before, I think I have a sense of what has happened. I think I have a sense of what has happened. But there was a time when, as you mentioned, this was being Black was foundational. It wasn't representational. It wasn't even something that required the same degree of intentionality that we tend to expend now. It was like, what else am I?
Right.
What are we talking about? That, I mean, this is kind of the foundation of but see, this is where I think the change has occurred. It was not only the foundation to their existence, it was also the foundation to their Islam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my interest in Islam, usually at that time, when I get a chance to rub shoulders with some of those pioneers, and mashallah, I had the privilege of meeting your blessed mother, Allah yarhamuha, their interest in Islam was an extension of their interest in being truer, realer Black people. And I think that has been siphoned out of us very furtively, but something has happened where it has almost become something that is a contradiction to a sincere Islam to feel that foundational connection.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do always want to identify that, you know, there are lots of different communities of Black Muslims, right? Yeah. And so, you know, if you look at, like, for example, the community of Imam Muhammad, if you look at a lot of like Tijani, right? Like, I mean, like that kind of like disconnect is not as pronounced.
Sure.
I think there are other things that might be happening, but that kind of disconnect is not as
What other things happening?
No, I think in those spaces or those places, it might be about a relevance to the broader, right, that has decreased, right? So you will have like a community that's very much connected. They're very Pan-African, you know, they very much have a sense of themselves as Black people and a kind of as a historical sense of that, right? And a spiritual sense of that, right? And then the implications of that. But that message is not something that is landing beyond the community itself sometimes, right? So things like these, those can be the kind of things. So I think it's important. I think it's important to recognize the range, right, of people experiencing, and sometimes that's even about region, right? You know, where different things are happening. I think, but I do think at the same time that disconnect is important to understand, because when I look at a kind of like US American Muslim leadership landscape, right, kind of just nationwide, and I look like the people who are the loudest and are also Black, they do represent often that disconnect. And then if they're loudest and they're leaders, then that disconnect will then be something that people who are younger trying to figure out might kind of take on from them, right? You know what I mean? Because that's the person you see, as opposed to, you know, seeing somebody else do that. So I do think it's important to track and understand, and really to combat as well. Like, I think it's important to point it out. So while I want to identify the range, I just want to say, you know, there are ways in which ideas can be hegemonic, even if they're not like demographically, you know, like significant. You know what I mean?
For sure.
They can still be hegemonic because they have power, right? You're on a big stage, or you're at some huge institution, and you say X, Y, or Z, what you're able to say has a lot more power than the 20 other people who say something different.
Sure. So, one thing that, I've talked with you about in the past, and, it's always difficult to read your barometer. How are you, how are you feeling about kind of the Muslim community broadly, the Black Muslim community and the non-Black Muslim community, and the kinds of relationships that we are beginning to forge in the present? I feel like a lot of space is being created for conversation, a lot more than I've seen in the past. I haven't been a part of this community as long as you have, but I've been a Muslim for it's 20 years now, man. A little over 20 years now, and I feel like something is happening with millennials, and if I'm being honest, and it was hard for me to give them credit for this. But I did see something different after the murder of George Floyd. I did see something different. Now, what I saw, I'm still trying to figure out what I saw. But I saw something that I hadn't seen before.
I mean, I think a lot of people say that. I don't know. I don't know, because I was thinking about so I had an experience like with this chat group I was a part of, for example, right? And it was like predominantly, actually, I was the only Black woman in the chat group. And it was weird to me. I was like, I don't know why that is, but I was the only one. And, and I said something, right, to the group. I was like, this is not, these aren't millennials. They're like, I guess I'm a generation Xer, Z or whatever. I don't know what this is anyway. But so, right. But I was like, I said to the group, I was like, like for a long time I've been in this group, and I've just kind of been here because, I'm not trying to be rude, but I got to make it plain with y'all. This is not a safe space for a Black person, because they know the Black people here. And there's no reason for that. The sort of the kind of like professional, credentialized demographic of this group would mean that there'd be more than me. And the fact that there aren't more than me are a reflection of your relationships, because I don't really know y'all that well either, right? Yeah. So I tell the story to say, the response is like defensive. Oh no, that's not how we got this. This was kind of random. There was no willingness to take accountability and figure out what to do next. I mean, there was one person who kind of said something like that, but and then I was like, well, I'm out. Right. Have I heard from anyone since I left the group? Right? And it's fine. Like I'm not pressed.
Yeah, I mean, come on, man.
I got other things to do. Right. Like, it's just telling in that way. So that's one story. But on the flip side, I had a young woman who worked with me on Umi's archive. And I think now she's probably not the best example, because I think she was already kind of engaged in this kind of thinking, right, before George Floyd died. So I think she was already there. But for her, for example, and this is what I mean, but she, like, for example, there were just things about the history that she didn't know, right, that she learned through Umi's archive. There were things about her own history she didn't know that she went to examine, right, after kind of encountering that. So I feel like that possibility, right, that possibility of people learning something about a broader Muslim experience and then seeking to really understand their own, I think that I see as a possibility, as a place that's really.
Well, it's good that you see some possibility. We're getting somewhere here.
But I think, but the thing for me, I think, or that I don't know. I think, and so I try, and the reason, even like when I said about, let's think about the broadness, I think sometimes, social media and these places can feel like the world when they're just a part of the world. Yes. They might represent some hegemonies, but they're just a part of the world. I think that when it comes to younger folks, I think that it seems like the language might be there. The aspiration might be there. But they don't know their history. And so, and that I think kind of it sort of undermines the whole project, right?
Mhm.
Like this, I mean, because if you know this, you can actually build on it and get further, right? Than if you're like trying to do that. That I think for like old people, I guess I'm old people now, right? Like whatever. I think sometimes, or a certain cadre of old people is like they don't realize they have something to learn.
Mhm.
They think they already know everything,
Mhm.
right? They're not.
That's the problem with being old.
Right? They're not willing to interrogate why they have particular preoccupations with X, Y, or Z, right?
Mhm.
They're presuming, right, that what they know is it,
Right.
and they're not open, right? So it's about kind of trying to push, I think push like kind of younger folks to sort of come back to really understand what people have done before them, and not just like Malcolm X. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like my mother, I mean, she wasn't famous, right? I'm talking about everyday people,
Right. Yeah.
everyday people doing stuff, right?
Mhm.
And then for the older folks, I think it's about getting them to really reckon with their attachment to the little bit of power they have now because they're older,
Mm.
and like really let that go. Because if the law is in control, what you worried about?
But at the same time, you have to find a way of venerating elders. I think
No, I'm not talking about. No, that's different. Because we're not old people. The elders are still here, and we venerate them.
No, I ain't talking about venerating me.
No, I mean the elders.
They refer to myself as an elder.
So I'm saying young people, old people, and elders. Okay.
Right. That's the demarcation I like. Young people, old people,
Right.
and elders. You know what I'm saying? Right.
Right.
Hmm.
Because I mean, yes, and that's what the history is for, right? Because if you go back and you look at history, you will venerate and acknowledge and honor that, the living and the dead and the ancestors, because you'll be like, oh my goodness, like for that really happened, like it blows your mind.
Right.
Right. So it's a natural occurrence of that, but you can't do that if you don't know who they are.
That's true. I mean, I guess the Prophet ﷺ said that to have hope is from Iman. So when I'm thinking about the future of Islam in America, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Not optimistic.
Right.
Not optimistic. Not optimistic. Hope is more of almost a religious disposition. But I'm hopeful. I think that there are a few things that concern me. Maybe you could weigh in on them. One is just numerically, it just seems like Islam in Black communities is declining. I just don't, when I first accepted Islam in the late 90s, someone was taking Shahada after every Jummah. So much so that if I was having a conversation and there was brothers taking Shahada up near the front of the masjid, I wouldn't even start my conversation. It's like, somebody becoming Muslim, alhamdulillah, that's all the time. Now I find myself like I just arrived on a plane from Somalia. I'm like, which is the most constant, that's the highest concentration of Muslims in the world is in Somalia. Somalia is like 99.9% Sunni Muslim. But I find myself, I'm like, oh my God, the brother's taking his Shahada. Oh my God. I'm repeating the kalima with him. And I'm just like, what we've lost. Now, I think religion is declining in America. The public practice of religion is declining generally. But also, too, I just feel like, looking at your book, and I'm just like, man, I'm reading Muslim Cool. Like, how did we squander so much cultural capital?
I mean, I don't know the demographics. I think recently I listened to partially, there was a study by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where they talked about Sam Bagby's work on mosque attendance, and that there was a decrease in like Black mosque attendance, I want to say. Of course, mosque attendance is kind of a narrow thing, but I do think it speaks to the aging of communities, right? I think, and then the ways in which, like, even myself, like, I no longer live in the community that I grew up in, and there are no Black like, where I live, like in my close vicinity, right? Because of my job, there aren't any Black communities, so I'm not there. I'm Black, I'm Muslim.
That was gonna be my second piece, but go ahead.
But I'm not there, right? Because of where I live right now. And, you know, and I can't go home because the white people took it over again, right? It's too expensive to go back there. Yeah, so sure. I think so there are some structural issues that I don't know it's about people losing a particular. So I want to say that I think there are many things happening, and I don't want to lose sight of the larger structural issues, right? That are not just about some sort of failure of Black Muslims to reproduce themselves, right? But about these external realities, right? That kind of, you know, you're holding on with dear life to that property you got in the 60s, right? Because they're trying to raise property taxes, and somebody's always trying to get you to, so they can, you know, like this happened to one of my home masters in New York at Mosque Khalifa, you know, which, like, Malcolm X's name is on the deed, right? But he found that property, right? And, you know, and I've been a part of trying to help, you know, I did my own personal fundraisers, so they can keep the property. They own the property, right? But there are all these sharks, right? Trying to, because this is in Bed-Stuy. This huge, like, that they want that property.
They want that. That's a hot
thing. You know what I mean? And so, like, and the people who are part of that community who are my age, many of them too, are similarly, like, they're young, they're trying to build families, they can't afford to buy something in New York, so they leave New York City, right? And they leave. So then what happens, right? That kind of thing. So I think those, you know, I talk about, you know, it's like, even, you know, when I think about, like, my mother's generation, you know, you could squat in some house in Brooklyn, you know, to make your own thing. You can't do anymore. You could, one person could have a job at the post office, make some good money.
Sure.
And buy something.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, so the economic realities have also changed, right? And I think impacted that kind of thing. So I think that's one thing that that is important to take note of. The other thing which is more of an internal critique is either the failure or the inability to reproduce leadership. So, like, one of the places that I love, and I actually want to do an interview once. And I talked to Imam Pleeman once just about it. You know, there are very few masjids that, you know, sort of founded in Black communities.
Right now, you're referring to Atlanta, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna say there are very few masjids that are founded in Black communities in which the original sort of, like, leadership, male leadership, has transitioned and left, and there's new. Right? So one of those is Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam. And Imam Pleeman Al-Amin has been there for a long time. And I asked him, I was like, because now Imam Suleiman Hamid is Imam. And Suleiman I know because Suleiman's from the Bay, but we were in Syria together.
MashaAllah.
Good. And he was like, well, Imam Muhammad said we're supposed to do this. So he basically, like, set a plan, you know, well, here's our plan. And so they had a successful turnover of leadership, right? Which matters, right?
Sure.
As opposed to many other places where that has not happened, where the same person is still there, still the imam of the masjid, right? And so I think that's also part of that creates something, right? Like, because it kind of, if younger people don't feel like they can get involved, they can participate, and they can be heard, they're probably less likely, right? To come back, you know. And then also, there's also just the idea that, you know, like you said, religion is decreasing. Like, I always joke about, you know, when I went to college, you know, I grew up Muslim, went to Islamic school from kindergarten to 8th grade, and went to public school, you know, and when I got to college, you know, all the, like, Arab US Americans, Middle Eastern, you know, South Asian background people, they're finding Islam. All the Black people are like, they grew up in, like, religious community, so they're trying to find something else right now.
Exactly. They're exploring, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think people come back, but still, right? Like, there's this period because they're just like, oh my God, this is a new. Me personally, that didn't work out because, you know, Ramadan came around, I needed, because I remember I went to the first MSA meeting, and the guy was like, oh, we don't do politics. And I was like, this is whack. So I was, I was a BSA. I was done with y'all. But then Ramadan came. I needed a place to break my fast. So,
That's really a beautiful story because, and I think too, I mean, I'm gonna use the dreaded word, I think in that you don't recognize your privilege as somebody born into a Muslim family. A lot of this, and I've actually mentioned this, okay, let the cat out the bag, Dr. Suad and my wife are, friends. Yeah. I've actually mentioned
Ace Boone.
Ace Boone. You did. But I've actually mentioned that I think a lot people that have Muslim parents, people that have that very natural, there's an almost inherent relationship with Islam. I don't think your religiousness is built on the the dynamics of the Muslim community in that way. I think certainly it's affected by the dynamics of the Muslim community, but I don't think like you have some converts that like an issue at his local masjid with the Arab-led leadership and administration there. This could lead to a falling out that could lead to him leaving Islam.
I mean, I think that depends, though. I mean, first of all, I saw there was a comment. Someone said something about service work versus community work. And I think that was important. I wanted to highlight that because I think
there it is right there.
Organizing, right? This idea, true, right? About, the reason why you talk about my parents' generation and why they became Muslim, because Islam was going to offer something to Black people. My mother said that. She's like, this is, and it was in the various forms, whether it was like State Street Masjid in Brooklyn, the first Cleveland Masjid in your first Cleveland Masjid in Cleveland, whether it was a Nation Islam temple in LA, right? Like it was doing something, right?
You can use Chicago. We know I was
just trying to give a national.
Yeah, but
Cleveland.
Don't forget the HQ when you talk about Islam in America. Detroit.
First of all, it started in Detroit. Okay,
Detroit is Mecca. Chicago is Medina.
Right. But anyway, my point, I was just trying to get
Baghdad or something like that.
I was just trying to get a range, right? Okay. Because, and actually, I thought about LA just because I was reading that book. It's called "Those Who Know Don't Say." It was a great book, and it's about thinking about the Nation of Islam and sort of like the carceral state and like prison advocacy and the ways in which, right, sort of Muslims who have been incarcerated really shape, right, the abolition, like the kind of the roots of abolition that we see now kind of flourishing. Anyway, so I think I lost my thought. Sorry.
You were look, there was so much talking and joshing, you forgot what you were going to say. No, you were talking about Muslims nationally and difference between service work.
Oh, right. So I think the idea is being that the Black Muslim communities were building something for Black people, and it attracts Black people. The question is, right, when you look at the Black Muslim communities around you, are they building something for Black people that people want to come to, right? If you build, they will come. Or are they doing something else, which might be valuable, but it's just not going to yield the same kind of like response that that you might be looking for. But your point about being raised Muslim, I mean, I think it depends also where you were raised Muslim and how you were raised Muslim, right? I think I remember once talking to this young woman. Now she wasn't a diasporic African, like in the sense that she wasn't the descendant of enslaved Africans. She was, I think, Nigerian background. She grew up in the South. She's Black, but the Muslim community she was a part of was like was not primarily Black. It was primarily an immigrant community, right? So immigrants, I think, might be from South Asia mostly, but it wasn't. So there was all this anti-Blackness that she experienced growing up that she didn't know how to name. And she just kind of brushed up until she figured it out, right? And she's like, "This, you know what I mean?" So for her, then, it's kind of like, and those things do affect you, right? Like, if, like, you know what I mean? That does affect you, right? And that does affect and can affect your relationship, because if you don't love yourself, right? Like, it's like when I talk about knowledge of self in the book, and I someone else should do this because I'm not going to do it. But in the book, I spend some time talking about knowledge of self as articulated by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And I make this footnote about the fact that in Al-Ghazali's book, The Alchemy of Happiness, the first thing is like knowledge of self, right? Like that's the first principle in this book. I was like, somebody should do that. Because oftentimes people think about the nation in particular as not having any sort of deep knowledge of like broader Islamic tradition. So I thought that was important to sort of bring up. But the point is like,
people dispute that. You and Wesley Muhammad. No, go ahead.
Anyway, but my point being that like, you know, if you don't know who you are and love yourself, then you won't know that Allah loves you. If you don't think that Allah loves you, right? Why would you be Muslim?
Allah Akbar.
You know, so like, so I think, you know, I do think that can matter. So I don't think it's just being raised in a Muslim family that kind of protects you from that. I think it's the kind of Muslim family and community that you're raised in that can protect you, the kind that sort of cultivates your identity, cultivates you and nurtures you, right? And empowers you and tells you, right? You know, like I tell people all the time, like, you know, I grew up, you know, I knew I was Black, I knew I was a woman, I know all that stuff. I knew, but as white people, it's crazy. Not me. I can do anything I want to do.
Allah.
You know what I mean? Like that is how, you know, and so that's and you know, and that's true for Black people in general, right? It's like if you don't have that, it's hard. And these, you know, it's like white supremacy is real. It's everywhere and it's incessant. And that's why it's like, you know, your mentor is like Shaitan, right? Shaitan always up in your ear saying something.
Always, always,
right?
Don't stop.
So like, and the patriarchy too. I
mean, look, it's only 8 minutes. That I don't.
We got to go.
I don't know what that is, but
that was me, Samar.
I don't know what that is, but you know, but look,
yeah,
you're gonna wait till the no, I don't know what that is, but I do. Okay, you got few minutes left. Most illuminating find as an archivist on UMI's archives. What I mean, that piece that you talked about earlier, I think was amazing. The curriculum and you know about the school, but anything else? Because I mean, I'm really interested in this project.
The most illuminating find.
Interesting find.
There's a picture of Sidney Poitier. It was picture at like a dinner, like at somebody's house. I'm like, and on the back, he's like, "Thank you, Happy New Year's." I'm like,
that's definitely illuminating.
Like 1968 New Year's. But no, I think I'm probably one of the most illuminating five. So my mother's father, I never knew him. He died before I was born. He was a Black fireman, an early Black fireman in New York City, and he also served in World War II. And he was this like documentarian, like not officially, right, but like this documentarian and photographer, because there are all these photos from basically, I think maybe the earliest might be the late 20s, right, through like he died in 75, and most of them were taken by him. And in his photos are his photos from his time in the service in World War II. And there's got to be like 500 of them. And he was in what they call the forgotten theater of war. It was the Persia corridor. And so basically, you know, Black GIs mostly didn't see combat, right? So they were there to build ridges and roads for you know, for people who were sort of traveling through. So his photos are from Tehran. His photos are from, you know, Mumbai, Karachi, right? There are a couple of photos in China, although I'm not sure those were his. I don't know if he made it to China, but they were building these roads, right? And it was crazy because one, I didn't know, right, that those were parts of the theater of war. But two, like as someone who's Muslim, right, the places he was at are places where people that I now have close relationships to, right, as in people, like my friend Tanaz, like her family's from Iran, you know, or the spiritual significance of those places, right, as a Muslim, right, as well. So that was probably one of the most illuminating ones, just thinking about, so that's on that level, just this idea that, and he was in a segregated military, because in his photos, like they're like I said, like 500 photos, there are like white people in like 3 of them.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, I mean, he has photos with sort of Iranian, he become allies, right? So these other Iranian men, allies in, and what was then British India, right? Like this kind of thing. But there are like literally 3 pictures of white people in them.
So now look, I came on the show and I said, Suad's scholarship is so broad, her experience is so broad, and the media that she uses are so broad. I don't want to talk about gender. I don't want to talk about gender. Now,
Gender. Okay. I thought you want to talk about gender, like parenting.
No. I'm not going to ask about gender in the same way that it is not an affront, but when they call you just talk about Black issues, and say, they have programs that they throughout the year. They never call me to talk tafsir, never hadith, never fiqh, never Arabic, but February, Black History Month. Ubay, can you tell us about the Black Sahaba? It's like, right. And there's something about that that's a bit patronizing. I said, you know what? We're not gonna have a conversation that I'm gonna talk about gender, but I do know this is something you like to talk about. So
I like to talk about dismantling the patriarchy.
Right. So you like to talk about dismantling the patriarchy.
Like, let's be specific.
Right. You like to talk about dismantling the patriarchy. And as a Black man in America, I don't know what you're referring to. Most incarcerated, dying by homicide the most, least educated, dying by police violence the most.
Do you know who kills the most Black women?
Black men. Do you know who kills?
That's called patriarchy.
Do you know who kills the most Black men?
That's what we're dismantling. So I'm not interested in the most incarcerated, because we know that and we care about that and we fight for that every day.
So, but
I'm interested in is dismantling the structures that are both external and internal to our community that create situations in which my life is at risk, in which your daughter's life is at risk, and with which your son's life is at risk, because they're connected. There's a connection.
Yeah, they're undoubtedly connected. But I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think that's not the right term. That's not the right term. But
I think that's and like I said, when I see old people, we have to be ready to reckon with the power we have and let it go. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just saying that's not what it sounds to me like you're talking about is Black men that are immoral, Black men that lack character, Black men that are insecure.
No. Patriarchy, right, is a structure, is a system in which power and authority is reckoned with those people who are identified as male, and they exercise that power and authority through dominance, coercion, and violence. That is patriarchy. That is the way that white slave masters ran their plantations, right? That is the way that U.S. imperialism works when it goes to free Muslim women, right? And that is the way where a Black man who, like his Black partner, right, female partner in this case, right, is subjected to white supremacist violence, then goes and subjects that to her. Like, these are connected. This is what patriarchy is. So on that note, I think it is a wonderful time for us to say goodnight, because I am old and this is way past my shut it down time.
Okay. We're talking. But look, I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Always good to talk with you. Give my best to your family. Give my best to Tahir.
I will.
We're praying for him and all of his work, and I'm eager to see Umi's archive really flourish and become something that I can share with my daughters to say this is where we come from. This is what it meant to be Muslim and Black and a woman in America generations ago, and this is the legacy that we inherit, and this is what we're trying to build upon. So, Jazakallah khair. We'll talk soon, inshallah.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd like to remind you again to please support ALIM's Giving Tuesday campaign that you can find at launchgood.com/give license to think. And also about our book club next week, where we'll be going over Dr. Saad's book, Muslim Cool. And you can find the information at alimprogram.com/book club. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Inshallah, join our book club and support ALIM for Giving Tuesday. We'll be hosting a live event on November 3rd with alumni. Ustadh Ubaydullah Evans will be hosting alumni that evening. So inshallah, please join us for that program as well. And please continue to keep up with ALIM and support us. Thank you all for joining. Assalamu alaikum.